Welcome to Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast, where we tackle all sorts of great topics in the areas of recruitment, job searching, mindset, technology, marketing, culture, and lots more. It's amazing what you'll pick up. Thanks for joining me. Well, welcome back, everyone. Another great episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. It's our tech series part 4, and I have the fantastic Jonathan Dowdall in the house. How you doing, Jonathan?
Very well. Thanks for having me on, Darren.
Have I pronounced your name correctly?
You did a really good job with it.
There you go. I did it. Well done. But for everybody out there, we're going to tackle a very interesting topic, and a topic that's more and more pressing every day. Ethical hacking and its place in this cybersecurity conscious world. So Jonathan is a penetration tester and cybersecurity professional with over 20 years experience in the industry. He has a passion for finding vulnerabilities and helping organizations protect themselves. Jonathan has worked for a wide range of industries over the years and performed penetration tests, large and small, both as an internal resource and external consultant. So welcome again to the show, Jonathan.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I've seen some of your previous guests, so I feel like I've got big boots to fill today.
Oh, no, mate. This is going to be one of the most, probably the most well-received episodes, because everybody is just obsessed with cybersecurity and hacking, and it's just the buzzword right now.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Yeah, it's definitely just grown in popularity. It just doesn't seem to be stopping at all, and
No.
yeah, it's just increasing, and may you live in interesting times, right?
Yeah, I mean, and let's jump in. I kind of want to get to know how you fell into testing and hacking. Or actually, before we do that, am I right in assuming that ethical hacking and penetration testing are the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. It can be a very interchangeable set of terms. It kind of falls under the banner really of offensive testing, and there's definitely a number of kind of subcategories of that handle different things. But penetration testing and ethical hacking, in my opinion, can be very interchangeable things.
Great, awesome. So I can use them freely.
Yeah.
But I'd love to kind of get to know how you fell into this world, how you became a hacker, and why you love it so much.
Well, I was thinking back, and I'm not too sure who to blame first for it. It was either Matthew Broderick for his role in War Games.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie? Is that a movie?
I haven't, no, but I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, I feel like probably every tester or everyone in the industry of my age has probably seen that movie. Maybe some of the newer people wouldn't be aware of it, but yeah. It came out in the mid '80s, and it was it's very impressionable for me, because despite the fact that the movie was just kind of quite fantasy based, it did actually introduce some very real concepts, like the idea of war dialing, which is where at one point he had set up his modem to dial a block of numbers, looking for other modems with other computers on the end, and that was a very legitimate hacking technique, still used up until maybe 2005 kind of ish. Right. And it's something that I've done in a number of engagements. And that definitely introduced me to the idea that there was a world kind of beyond, what I was aware of, because you're going back to a time when there was no internet or anything like that.
That's right.
And I think probably the other second person that really kind of piqued my curiosity with the whole thing was Kevin Mitnick. Does that name ring a bell with you?
Yeah, it doesn't know.
Yeah, so he, back in the mid '90s, he was somebody who came to the attention of the FBI because he was hacking into, as he says, Fortune 500 companies, and he ended up going on the run. And you kind of think, if you're running from the FBI, you probably want to keep your head down, keep a low profile, but he didn't. He kept hacking into organizations. And this had hit the news at home, and I can remember listening to it on the radio. Like, there was periodic updates going on. Maybe every couple of weeks you'd hear about this guy and what he'd been up to. And I was absolutely amazed by the audacity of it. I mean, just to keep going on your hacking spree when you're being chased by the FBI was, I mean, it was just incredible to hear. And I was I was impressed by that level of obsession that somebody could have.
Yeah.
And he actually, I mean, he got caught. He did some time in jail, and
Right.
he got out. I don't know if he was allowed to use a computer for several years after that. But he wrote a couple of books, and he's still around today. He's kind of more or less a salesperson for his company at the moment. And he turned up at one of the Australian conferences just before COVID had kicked off. And any interview I've seen with him, he seems like a very rational individual. He seems kind of fairly well grounded, and it was just thinking back to that time. It was it definitely ignited something and a curiosity in me, and I think very soon after that, I got a modem with access to the internet. It was Windows 95, and a whole new world awaited. And I think probably from that point onwards, I just wanted to be a hacker. That's all I wanted to be. I wasn't aware of any industry that had started up around it, because it was just still very embryonic.
Yeah.
And literally nothing was going to stop me from doing it. No one was going to tell me I couldn't learn about it, or I couldn't do it, or anything along those lines. It was literally just kind of pure passion that was starting to drive me. And thinking back to those days again, slow internet connections, there's no way you could download operating systems or anything like that. VMware didn't exist. I mean, it was really back down to basics. And I can remember joining a mailing list where some console kind of mailed me out a very, very old copy of Red Hat Linux.
Right.
Literally turned up my doorstep in an envelope, and I installed that. And again, everything was just a hard slog trying to get everything up and running, and that was just complete immersion in Linux then. So invariably, you just had to learn about it as you went along. And I think from that point onwards, there was my interest was there. It was just absolutely unbreakable. And I'm kind of happy to say, 20, 25 years on, it's still going strong. I still have that passion for it. So I know I'm
Why do you
definitely.
think that is? Do you like kind of pushing the boundaries, or do you like doing something a little bit more risque? What is it about hacking that makes it so attractive?
There's a couple of different factors in it. I think the ability to solve a puzzle is really interesting, because sometimes the puzzles that you have to solve, you kind of have to find them, and they're not kind of there in your face. And certainly it can be really satisfying to hop onto the network of an organization and make a full compromise of it. When you're in a position when you do those types of tests, and it's a very satisfying feeling, without a shadow of doubt. But I think really there's the buzz you get from doing something like that, but there's something just really satisfying in being able to find an issue and tease it out, and turn it into something tangible, because at the end of the day, you're effectively kind of feedbacking a report to a client that can kind of take that and then implement the recommendation, and as a result, they'll walk away from the engagement much more secure than they were when you started.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just incredible when you think about it. But I'll kind of get into this a little bit more later on. But did you have much IT training or IT exposure before that, or you kind of just learned from the ground up from the hacking point of view?
I think there was always kind of bits of technology in the house. I think most people my age probably had an Atari 2600, and that was probably my first introduction to technology.
Yep.
And there was always like bits of computers lying around the house. My dad was particularly interested in it as well. And really, my exposure to IT or computers in general, I feel kind of came from trying to play games.
Okay.
So you get games with they'd be in a zip format or something like that, and you're like, okay, what's this? I don't know what it is. How do you so invariably then you started learning about command line operations and things like that, and just the exposure that you got just through trying to get games working and trying to get the sound working and things like that, definitely just gave you a fundamental skill set then that you could start off with. I did a I'm not too sure what the equivalent would be over here. It was like a City and Guilds, maybe TAFE would be the equivalent or something like that. It was only a 1 year programming course that I did probably in very late teens, and that introduced me to C and C++ and things like that. So at that stage, I kind of felt more confident just in general with computers, and then really just the hacking stuff just kind of came as when you've got access to the internet, you've got access to unlimited information virtually. So there was just a steep learning curve there, and yeah, also lots of fun.
Wow, that's incredible. Well done. And so, everybody's talking about security now. Everyone I interview wants to get into security. Everybody's talking about security. Everybody's talking about don't click on this link. Don't open that attachment. It's all become we're all becoming extremely security focused, conscious. But where does hacking or penetration testing fit into that security world?
Yeah, so it's a very definite part of the fabric or kind of the sphere, however you want to look at it. I think fundamentally the whole action is born of if you've got something to protect, if you've got digital assets, if you've got something online, then you need to know how you're going to fare if it gets attacked, because it could be all sorts of critical information in there, customer details, financial details. There could be anything and everything. Even the actual assets themselves will hold some sort of intrinsic value. So trying to understand where you are in terms of if you get attacked, how that's going to go is quite important. And I discussed a little earlier about how kind of penetration testing and ethical hacking would kind of fall under the banner of offensive security. Well, it's kind of branched out a little bit into things like red teaming, adversary simulation, and things like that. Whereas penetration testing tends to kind of deal with very bite-sized components of assets. For example, if you want to test a web application, well then typically a penetration test will handle that. Whereas if you want to test an organization and how that would fare against a more encompassing attack, well then a red teaming engagement would probably be more oriented to kind of finding out how you're going to go there. And typically an engagement like that would involve phishing and things like that. So yeah, there's a bit of a differentiation between them.
Gotcha. So it's almost like, there's a more ground level unidirectional way to hack, but then there's also a whole campaign you can put together.
Exactly. Yeah. And the skills are they an awful lot of the skills can be transferable. There are some skills that you would typically use in a red teaming engagement that would be maybe considered to be more advanced in terms of depending on the assets that you're facing. I mean, you may be in a position where you have to kind of develop a tool or an exploit, or there could be any number of different kind of complexities that you'd run into on an environment per environment basis, and that would require maybe very specialized skill sets. And sometimes an engagement may not necessarily be done by one person; it would be done by kind of multiple individuals.
Gotcha.
It depends on the circumstances, of course.
Yeah, okay.
But that's kind of really how it fits in. I mean, the other side of the coin really is the defense side, and I guess there really is two sides, offensive and defensive. There's a couple of then kind of ancillary things that kind of come into the picture as well that kind of complement one or the other. But that's fundamentally how it fits into the industry. It's really important to know how you're going to kind of end up if a determined attacker has a go at you. Because I mean, I don't know kind of how much you would see week in, week out, but I'm looking at breaches every week, typically crypto exchanges, and hundreds of millions of dollars are going going missing. And it's there's an awful lot of dodgy things happening out there at the moment. So it's definitely important to get a perspective on kind of where you are with your security posture, and not just once. It needs to be done kind of on a continual basis, and things kind of change quite often. And you need to kind of keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of brings us to a really good point. Do you think that a lot of organizations are very reactive in the way that they deal with security? Like they wait for a breach to happen and then they start getting serious, or are they getting more savvy now and making sure that they're secure before they even start?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I've seen some customers recently that not just do periodic pen testing, but they also have bug bounty programs running as well. So I guess this is another little kind of differentiation between pen testing and bug bountying. Is that something that you've heard of?
No, I haven't.
No,
What was a good
yeah.
book
So
bounty?
it's something that's kind of come along really in the last maybe 8 years or so, and the idea behind it is that if you do a penetration test, well then typically that will be a certain amount of days. Those days are paid for irrespective of the result, and you may have just one tester, in some cases two. It depends on the assets involved, and then you get a very individualized kind of look at how that tester is just going to kind of do the job and come away with a number of different findings compared against a bug bounty program, which again can vary a little bit, but the idea is that you have more eyes on it. So people who partake in these programs are paid by the vulnerabilities they find, not necessarily by the time. So you could put 100 hours into something that was incredibly secure and not really find much with it at all, and you don't get paid for it. Whereas if you put, again, similar amount of time or any arbitrary amount of time into it, and you come away with many findings, well, then you get paid on a finding per finding basis. So,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, so it's definitely kicked off, and it's made a number of people millionaires, and it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think the real strength for companies is that they have many different people looking at an asset or their environment, and it can be much better than just having a dedicated pen tester looking at it sometimes. But I find that the strength actually comes from kind of blending both, because you
Right.
get benefits with one that you don't get with the other. So
Wow. So that's really interesting in that you're encouraging people to really be developing the skills as a hacker or as a penetration tester because you're incentivizing them to get paid on what they find.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And there's so many companies that have signed up to these programs, and it's definitely a sign of the times, because I think there was a tremendous amount of um, like fear, anxiety around penetration tests, and it was I think going back maybe before bug bounty programs came along, it was just you just simply didn't think about touching another organization's assets, even just to look at them and things like that. But if a company has joined one of these programs, well then it's I mean there are different rules and stipulations around what you can and can't do in many of these programs, but it's definitely a much better way of looking at it, or it's a more mature way when it's integrated into your kind of security program, and kind of what companies will do with these things. So yeah, I probably see a mixed bag. To answer your kind of your original question, I see an awful lot of proactivity out there,
Right.
and it's encouraging to see. I mean, I guess the companies I'm dealing with anyway are kind of coming to me, kind of requesting these services. So it's another kind of business line to be involved in incident response and things like that. So, but that's not to say, I mean, you could pool all the time and all the money in the world into these things and still get compromised. So it can be unfortunate, but definitely what I see is that companies that take the stuff a bit more seriously are an awful lot more resilient as a result.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the stronger they can protect themselves, the less chance, obviously, that they're going to be breached.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And do you think there are any particular styles of organizations that are more susceptible than others, larger versus smaller, multi-branch versus single, global versus local? Or is it all very much just technology based, regardless of all that?
Yeah, it can be a little bit of six of one and half dozen of the other. I think with big companies, it's what you find with big companies is they typically have a massive footprint, and they may not necessarily be aware of how big that is or how diverse it is. When you think about companies that have been around for decades, they typically acquire other companies, so they acquire the digital assets, they acquire their internet space. Some companies just have absolutely massive ranges online that sometimes you kind of left having to test in a fairly short period of time. And I find that the bigger the space, what you tend to find is this more stuff that's been left there that people have forgotten about, and quite often, you can find an entry point there that will lend itself to an additional compromise, or will just be kind of just bad in of itself. So I find that the larger and older the organization, it's more difficult to protect because they're just a bigger target. Having said that, you'll find probably with smaller companies, sometimes if they develop something using an insecure framework, or they've done something wrong, again, they can completely trip themselves up. And it can be, bad news for them in terms of a penetration test. But that's okay. I mean, that's kind of why these things exist, really, just to kind of find this out before the bad guys do. And it can be it can be eye-opening sometimes, and it can be difficult to kind of put a finger on precisely kind of what would be typically a more kind of insecure environment. So you never really know until you see it.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like in the movies, like they find that one little access point, that old something that nobody even remembers. It was so long ago, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of brings up a good point in that when you're developing your systems and you're progressing your IT systems, it's so important to keep track of exactly where you're at the moment, so you don't kind of band-aid things on top of the other, and then you start forgetting about what's happened to the layers underneath and how they're exposed.
That's it. And I've seen before where external assets trying to even find out, company can't even find out who owns them. It's it can be just such companies can just get themselves into such a state internally sometimes, particularly when you can't even identify who owns what and who's responsible for what. In an external perimeter, like, it's pretty important. So there's definitely some companies definitely have quite a bit of learning to do.
Wow, that's fascinating. And you touched on earlier that sometimes these projects can be quite short, but what's the general length of a hacking or a penetration testing project, or is it really just depending on the situation?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation, and you'd probably be surprised to kind of maybe hear that typically an engagement might last between 5 and 10 days, and that's for very specific quantities of assets that have been pre-scoped. So like one thing that has happened with penetration testing over the years, it's become kind of very streamlined. And if you were to go to 10 different organizations and ask them for a quote for pen testing in terms of time, and you describe the assets, as they're presented, you'd probably get a very similar timing, because at the end of the day, you can't kind of put an infinite amount of time into these things, primarily because there's a cost associated with it. Companies have the budgets, and the other thing is, if you've got individuals looking at these things, there's a kind of a point that you get to where it's just a point of diminishing returns.
Yep.
People being people, they get tired. Sometimes they get, they get frustrated or burnt out, but they certainly come to a limitation where they could probably only go so far in this particular instance. So if you look at something like, primarily kind of what we would be testing, day in day would be web applications, web services, mainly due to the fact that they're so prevalent. I mean, it's pretty much in everything we do, and it's basically a case of that you can spend a kind of like a 5 days, 10 days, something like that. It's enough time really to kind of get a feel for how the application or the environment is going to perform in terms of kind of the testing that you do. You can generally, if you start kind of pulling the thread and it's just issue after issue, well, then you identify that there's issues way beyond kind of what the pen test is going to, basically going to provide for you. But typically, it's a good opportunity for companies, particularly if many of the companies I deal with have kind of been through it kind of before anyway. It's a good opportunity just to have a fresh set of eyes on it, and basically you can often find findings that may have been found kind of not have been found last year or the year before, and it's that kind of I think it's just that relatively short, sharp pen testing window done periodically is probably the best way for companies to approach it.
Yeah. So they kind of, as you say, there seems to be this general best practices framework for how long a pen test should take. But at the same token, if someone really wants to get access to something and they have unlimited time and resources,
Yeah.
they might find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you mentioned that, there was a really interesting synopsis of a hacking attempt that I read a couple of years ago. I really enjoyed reading it. It was there was an Italian company called Hacking Team,
Right.
and I'm pretty sure, if memory serves me right, they were targeted because they were doing kind of very nefarious, kind of semi-dodgy things with different authorities that involved.
Hi, guys. Just a quick message. I'm always on the lookout for engineers in the managed services space across Australia, support engineers, systems engineers, network engineers, and solution consultants. I only work with the best companies that are going places, really value their staff, have great techs, and offer stacks of training and other benefits, up to $1,000 for successful referrals. Who do you know? Feel free to give me a buzz, 0414 659 800. But right now, back to the conversation.
Eavesdropping on different people's devices and things like that.
Wow.
But a hacker took, quite a big exception to that, and he broke into them, broke into their environment, deleted all their data, caused absolute chaos for them, and he did a write up on how he did it, and it was so beautifully done. I mean, obviously the fact that it was highly illegal is one thing, but reading the synopsis and how he approached it was, definitely a really interesting read, and it's a primary example of if somebody wants into your organization or into your network badly enough, they're probably going to do it, and you just don't want to come across that individual with it. And bear in mind that the person who did that, had a very, very high skill level, like exceptionally high.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a well worth read if any of your listeners want to check it out. It's probably just Google for a Hacking Team compromise walkthrough or something like that.
Fascinating. It's great. It's scary at the same time when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Nowhere is safe. It's you can do all you can do is your best to protect yourself. And follow best practice, and just keep good security hygiene as best as possible. But look, there's certainly a bit of luck involved in it as well.
Wow, that's crazy. And I mean, in terms of being a penetration tester or a hacker, what are the skills, the mindset, the tools that you generally need to be successful?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot that kind of comes down to how you approach learning and your desire to work on something until you've kind of come to the end of it. I kind of feel like you have to be comfortable with failure, because it feels like sometimes every little micro thing is just failing, and you basically just have to kind of keep working at that until you get a success. And some jobs are easier than others, but certainly sometimes you might find that you spend a significant amount of time simply just trying to get the application to work, or something, to get installed or something like that.
Right.
That in itself can be a very, very frustrating experience, particularly when you're on the clock.
Yeah.
So and that's even before you start testing. So you need to be somebody that's not kind of frustrated easily.
Yeah.
And I think having a mindset like you have to have that kind of I want to succeed mindset.
Yep.
And I think there's a couple of things in and around that which are very important to have if you want to be successful in the business. But I think that coupled with good technical skills is definitely they're kind of two sides of the same coin, basically. And that's something that you need to kind of keep working at. You're almost kind of working in an infinite space. Like even if there was no more technology, there was no more advances, even just if kind of things cut off today and you pretty much just had what you had to kind of work with, you could very easily spend the rest of your life just immersed in kind of what we have currently.
Yeah.
So what you find is that then there's different specializations where, some people will have a preference for, mobile application testing, or some people have a preference for internal testing and things like that. And you'll find that it's just the kind of the technologies and the length and breadth of everything is just too much for typically one type of person to manage. So you have to look for kind of sub expertises in these areas.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose I'm sure that hackers in one area will know hackers in another area, and you'll kind of have a camaraderie, then people that you can refer for different specialities.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a tremendous amount of information out there on on anything and everything, and even within organizations that have pen testing teams and kind of armies of consultants, there's always somebody who has specialized in something maybe that you haven't, and you can tap them on the shoulder and try and get as much information out of them as you can. Sometimes you're in a position where you do have to learn really quick, and sometimes that works out, and sometimes that doesn't. But I think there's like they say, often technical skills are something that you can learn, and it's as much to do with kind of your attitude and your approach to learning and things like that, which are the key things. I think if you've got the passion for it, you'll know about it, and then kind of everything else, I feel kind of comes after that just as a consequence.
Yeah. So you'll be passionate about it. You'll be resilient. You'll be patient. You'll have good technical skills. You'll continue to develop your skills. Be inquisitive as to what tools and technologies are out there that might do things in a different way. Mm-hmm. But what's really interesting is, people talk to me all the time about getting into security, and this is obviously one branch of security. But do you think people need to have a programming background, or what background, lends itself better to this kind of work?
I think having a programming background is really advantageous. It's something that can, because if you're good at programming, it's almost like you kind of wired your mind to think differently about problem solving, and you tend to look at things a little bit differently, even just with that knowledge of being able to use arrays and for loops and all that type of stuff. It definitely helps, and the ability to program can get you out of a spot sometimes. Sometimes the distance between where you are and where you need to go, you can go various different pathways, and sometimes the ability to program will open up an opportunity that would mean that you have to go a different way in a test if you didn't have that ability. So it's really beneficial, but it's not necessary, but it's something that I would definitely recommend. And it's great to see programming as being, it seems to be kind of a very fundamental thing in terms of, IT degrees and cyber, and, everyone's doing a bit of Python or whatever. And even like a little bit can go a long way. So it's definitely advantageous to have. But I think if you've come from, I've seen people that come from IT disciplines, and if they have some sort of like networking background or Active Directory background or even cloud, they can come up to speed an awful lot more quicker than somebody who's just coming in fresh. Because I think before you even think about security, you need to start thinking about building fundamental IT skills, how to manage operating systems. You need to be really kind of comfortable in that space. Not necessarily an expert, but you just need to be really comfortable. And one of the things that is you need to have the ability to kind of fend for yourself and kind of start to kind of resolve issues yourself, and it becomes a very individual thing then, because it's not that there isn't a community of people there that are there to help you, but I feel like it's like learning a musical instrument or a language or something like that. But you still kind of need to do it yourself. I think security or pen testing in that respect is kind of very comparable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and a lot of people always, say, what's the best way for me to get into security or, move into this area? And I always say, look, from what clients have told me and other people have told me, is that you have to have a good grounding and understanding of general IT or general infrastructure and applications before you start worrying about how to break into them or secure them, and et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose it's a bit of a combination of both. It's gain your skills, in the industry from the ground up in whichever discipline, whether it's programming or infrastructure, but then have a bit of a passion and do a lot of work on your own to explore the hacking and the programming side of things so that when you're ready, you can make that transition. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are disciplines within cybersecurity that are non-technical as well. Like, so you can look at GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance, or things like security awareness, which don't necessarily have the reliance on technology skills. It does really help, and I don't want to kind of brand them as being, like, I mean, you still do need to have a high level understanding of what's going on, preferably. But for anything in the technical domain, because it's like any of the technical disciplines in cyber, like, you could be a very, very competent pen tester, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you could swap into a blue team role where you're working on the defensive side, or it doesn't necessarily mean that you could swap into a forensic role where you're doing something like that. And even though there's overlaps within those skill sets, there still is a learning curve to move from one into the other, and it could be significant enough in some cases. So if you want to move into cyber, I would also suggest trying to work out where you kind of would be best placed, because I mean, you could end up spending a bit of time there and decide you don't like it, and that's absolutely fine. One of the things I'm hearing from specialist recruiters in the area is that for every 10 people that they kind of see coming through, cyber qualifications, is that maybe about 8 or 9 of them want to get into the pen testing space. And that also kind of on the other side, those types of jobs seem to account for maybe about 10% of current kind of open cyber roles. So there seems to be kind of a kind of weight on one side, but there's maybe an availability on the other side, availability issue on the other side. So I kind of get the impression that maybe there's an awful lot of people who want to maybe get into that type of role where they're not kind of fully aware of what goes on a day-by-day basis, because it could be very boring for some people. But I get the impression that some people think that it's like watching an episode of CSI Cyber, where there's 2 people hacking away on one keyboard and things like that. It's it's an awful lot of the job can be very, very seemingly mundane and
very process driven and very a lot high attention to detail and very methodical, really.
That's it. Yeah, particularly when it comes time to writing reports. I mean, you can invest an awful lot of time in reports, and there's all sorts of meetings you'll have to attend for one reason or another. And it's a side to it that really isn't that kind of visible, and unless you kind of try to kind of immerse yourself in it to some degree. But I think if it's an aspect of the business that you want to get into, I think you'll know whether you'd be best suited to or not. I kind of feel like it's one of those industries. But I think in order to make yourself stand out, there's an awful lot of people that want to get into the industry. To make yourself stand out, typically what you'd want to do is basically try your hand at bug bounty programs. You can simply just sign up to these bug bounty programs. There's an awful lot of public ones, and then you can basically kind of start your journey there. There's plenty of online platforms like Hack the Box or Pen Tester Lab that are really good for basically just kind of cutting your teeth. They're fairly inexpensive, and they'll give you a good opportunity to really just kind of get your teeth into genuine kind of hacking problems that are just kind of contrived. Some of them are more realistic than not. They'll if you kind of keep at them long enough, they'll basically up your skill set, and you'll definitely see yourself improving as you go along. And then there's just plenty of online resources to follow as well. But I think, and it's something that I noticed that you concentrate on an awful lot, is soft skills, which I think is massively important. Like the ability just to get in touch with somebody over LinkedIn, or even pick up the phone, go out for a coffee with somebody, and go to conferences as well. Now that they've started back up, I think is a really important. You need to network, and I think you need to be authentic about it as well. Not be not simply kind of trying to rub somebody the wrong way, or annoy them by getting in touch with them. I think there's a certain kind of again, I guess it kind of falls into the whole soft skills domain.
Yeah.
But I think
finesse in how to approach people. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, exactly. So people don't think you're trying to, I don't know, just get something out of them and off you go. But I mean, I think if kind of you combine those skills with motivation, visible motivation, and a bit of kind of salesmanship, kind of winning yourself. I think it'd be a good way to get into the industry, no doubt about it.
Are there courses or graduate courses or programs where you study something in security and then there are graduate roles? I haven't really heard of things like that for security side of things.
Yeah, I'm not really too sure about what's going on there. There was kind of when I got into the industry, there was no cyber specific courses or qualifications, and they kind of had all kind of just started to kind of start up as time went on. So it's something I'm not overly familiar with, but I think all of the major universities, particularly here, will offer some sort of qualifications in it, and some of them seem quite good as well. Like I'm not too sure which university it is, but I've seen a couple of people come out of it with, they make them like do a CCNA, but I think I absolutely love seeing that, because that foundation in networks is such a pivotal thing, and it just allows you to understand what's going on, and how two computers will talk to each other, and it's to have that qualification basically says to me, okay, this person kind of understands the OSI layer, and how to they understand IP and things like that. So I think it's a very, very smart way of making your student think about networking, which again can be built upon. And so I'm not too sure what's happening there in terms of qualifications. It's not something I've ever looked into, but I think it's I hear that, like, if you come out with a cyber qualification, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have an easy time finding a job as well. I think the industry has been under a reasonable amount of scrutiny, because I guess it depends on how you define an entry level job, but I think there's definitely been like a bit of flack heading the industry's way in terms of employing people without experience, or without enough experience. And from the business point of view, I can kind of see it, because at the end of the day, if you've taken somebody on board, they may not stick around. You may invest a couple of years in them. Like for something like pen testing, I think you'd almost need to give it kind of 5 years before you can kind of come up to speed. You can be left alone to basically engage with a client, to perform most tests, to kind of hold your own in the next meeting. Sometimes you get embroiled in kind of very political situations on the client side, where they either don't like the severity of the findings, or there's something along that. So you kind of have to be able to kind of speak for yourself and hold your own. And there's an awful lot of those kind of soft skills that come with it as well. And I think it's a reasonable amount of time before you could definitely be left to your own devices. So I can kind of see if when somebody comes fresh in the door, well, I guess they kind of have to shadow people up until a point where they can kind of stand on their own 2 feet. So I can kind of see it from the company's point of view as well. But having said that, I mean, it's not just like the expenditure in cyber is going up and up and up. So there's really, I guess there's fewer excuses for it now. But I think if I was a candidate, I would definitely try to differentiate yourself. And I kind of think it's a case of become what you want to be, and you'll be what you want to become. It's kind of like a funny way of looking at it, but I think if you put yourself out there as somebody who's just kind of committed to this, there's no question about it. You will start to differentiate yourself, and it will definitely make you more attractive to potential employers.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice as well, for people to reach out to other people that are experienced in the industry through forums or events or webinars or communities, etc., on and off the web, to really understand what's involved, because a lot of people don't know enough about what they might be signing up for. And I think any experience you can get, or any insight you can get from someone who's been doing it for 20 years or so, will allow you to really understand whether this is going to be the path for you.
Yeah, 100%. It's it's good to talk, and some people are more amenable to it than others. I'm always kind of very open to talking to people about it. At least I think I am. There's an awful lot of people out there who will help you if you simply ask for it.
Yeah, No, that's great. And where do you think, things are going to change and going to move forward in terms of technology now being, that technology is advancing so quickly? How is that going to fit into what you do?
I think that there's always, it always feels like there's a steep learning curve with this stuff, and I think sometimes even on an engagement basis, you'll learn something that you didn't know previously.
Yeah.
And then when you start to kind of introduce macro technologies, like for example, when I arrived in Australia, maybe 10 years ago, cloud wasn't all that prevalent, and within those 10 years, it's really just started to dominate. And I feel like kind of maybe mobile applications have done much of the same thing. And typically, what you'll find are that some testers are kind of quite comfortable within their space, and they enjoy working within that space, and they won't necessarily be flexible enough to kind of take on something new, and that's fine. I think in my own opinion, different people have different opinions on it. I think you need to kind of eventually try to become as specialist and generalist as you can be.
Yeah.
Kind of a bit kind of contradictory, but for example, I absolutely hated testing mobile applications. I avoided it like the plague, and it eventually just kind of came around where these things are just so prevalent now that you don't really have much of a choice. So you just kind of have to get stuck into it. And I actually enjoy testing them now, and it's kind of a very specialized field to get into in of itself, because you're not just talking about one platform, you're talking about Android and iOS and kind of whatever else is out there.
Right.
And you need to try to kind of cover as much of that space as you possibly can, which is it's really difficult. I mean, there's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and trying to continually kind of keep yourself updated. It's pretty tough. But typically, what you find with newer technologies is that somebody will be more amenable to kind of specializing in them because they get more experience in them, and then eventually just that information starts to kind of proliferate, and the technology becomes normalized, and eventually kind of we all catch up and kind of see where things are. Another thing that can help is that if there's big breaches in that particular technology or something like that, it definitely help people to get interested in it. And it's not easy, because I think you're battling against the human condition as well. We all like to be kind of in our comfort zones, and it's sometimes it's not a space where you can kind of be happy kind of sitting in your comfort zone.
I think in technology, in particular, you just can't stay in your comfort zone in general.
No,
and it's way too fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And I mean, it can be intimidating at times, and I think that's probably one thing that it can be. I think when you let something intimidate you like that, it can really affect how you approach learning about it. So I think it's something you probably need to kind of keep on top of. Easier said than done. But I think by kind of applying some of those good kind of attitudes and personal traits, it'll probably kind of serve you well throughout your career.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. And it would be remiss of me not to ask, just generally, if organizations or even smaller businesses are listening and they want to just get a bit of a, 2 or 3 step process into how they can make sure they can be more secure with what they do every day. What advice do you have for them?
Oh, how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
It entirely depends on the organization, whether they're large or small, or whether their assets are primarily sitting on kind of legacy systems, or whether they're just protecting a single app, or it depends on a whole multitude of factors. But I'm kind of a big believer in just getting back to basics. If you, for example, if you developed a core web application that does, some sort of, fintech business or something like that, you need to make sure that, your front door is protected from people just kind of finding a vulnerability and kind of leveraging their way in. Periodic pen testing, code reviews, things like that are really important. I think something that's beneficial for users as much as it is companies themselves is to make sure that you enable 2FA for whatever you can. It can be a bit of a pain to use, but it can be a real lifesaver when it's implemented properly as well.
And
of
just
course,
for everybody out there, that's two-factor authentication. Yes.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so either using kind of something that comes a code to you that comes via SMS, or there's an awful lot of apps that can kind of jump in and kind of save the day there.
Yep.
But I think patching is probably a really big thing to get on top of as well. Probably some of the breaches that we've seen, I guess, in the last couple of decades have come as a result of services that are not patched. So it's really important to make sure that particularly anything externally facing, particularly if it's a well-known service, make sure that there's no vulnerabilities in it and just keep on top of patching. So I'd probably say that as well. But kind of everything else, I'd probably tend to kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, making sure that you're using kind of secure non-default passwords is a key thing as well. But kind of like back to another point that I was making earlier about some companies not even being aware of kind of, who the asset owner would be for a particular for a particular server and their environment. It's yes, everyone's kind of starting from a different position, so it depends really on the customer.
Yeah, certainly lots to think about.
yeah, 100%.
Oh boy, yeah, wow. Well, I really appreciate that, Jonathan. That's sensational. You've certainly opened up my eyes to this world of security and penetration testing. My God, it's just another whole window, another whole world that's quite in depth. But if people want to find a way to contact you and reach out, is there a best way to do that?
Just I'd say get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Just mention the podcast. I'm always more than happy to connect with people and chat to them. There's no issue there at all. Kind of back to the soft skills thing. If you send me a random connect, I may not necessarily accept it, but if you add a nice little note in there, I'm 99 times out of 100 I'm going to accept it.
Sensational.
I'm more than happy to chat to people. So catch me there.
Awesome, Jonathan. Well, I'll put your LinkedIn handle in the show notes for everybody.
Yep.
And really appreciate you coming on the show and spending your time and sharing your expertise with us. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yep.
And I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. Certainly lots to think about. And for everybody wanting to get into that world, as Jonathan mentioned, try and reach out to some people that have been doing it, that have some experience. Really try and pick their brains, really try and understand what you might be getting yourself into, because it can look, quite different from the outside, I think, before you actually go in and experience it. But I'm sure it's extremely rewarding, if you have the right mindset and you have a passion for it.
Definitely. And thanks very much for having me on your show. It's really appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it. Anything else you want to leave us with?
No, stay safe out there. It's a jungle out there, as they say. So stay safe.
Love it. Well, Jonathan, thanks again. Have a great day, and everybody out there, we hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you very, very soon for another episode and some more Tech Series episodes as well. Bye for now.
Take care.
Thanks again for joining me for another episode of Soul Searching, the Soul Recruitment Podcast. If you'd like to join me as a guest on the show, I would be delighted to collaborate. Feel free to buzz me on 0414 659 800 or email me on darren@soulrecruitment.com.au. I'm always on the lookout for great guests who can share their stories and expertise with my community. But for now, though, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time.